Last classes we saw about the living world and the biological classification in botany. So now we are saying about the living world and about the plant kingdom. So under plant kingdom, there are so many types like algae, bryophytes, pteridophytes, gymnosperms and angiosperms. So yesterday we saw about algae. So what are the differences between all these types? That is algae, bryophytes, pteridophytes, gymnosperms and angiosperms. So when you compare all these things, there's from algae, it is mostly aquatic and it is gradually evolving to the terrestrial forms. So when you see the algae, yesterday we saw the main features of algae as they are aquatic and multicellular, and there are some exceptions like unicellular algae also, like Chlamydomonas, chlorella and Acetabularia, and but mostly they are multicellular, and under the plant kingdom all are autotrophic, that is they are able to produce their own food and they are eukaryotic. So in what ways did bryophytes differ from algae? So we'll see in detail about the properties of bryophytes. So how it differs from algae. So what are these bryophytes? They are called the amphibians of the plant kingdom. So why are we calling it as an amphibian of a plant kingdom? That is, they can survive in both the water as well as in land. So there occurs a gradual transition from aquatic to the terrestrial forms, because algae are purely aquatic, though they can exist in slight moist environment. So here there is a gradual evolution. So they are called amphibians of the plant kingdom because they can live in soil, but they need water for sexual reproduction. So only for reproduction they need water, otherwise they can live in soil. So they can be terrestrial, but they need water for sexual reproduction. They occur in damp, humid and shaded localities. So the term is called Zyophytes. So since they occur in damp, humid and shaded localities, they are called the Zyophytes. And another main difference between the algae and bryophyte here is body is more differentiated than that of algae. In algae, we saw that the body is a thalloid. There is no differentiation into root, stem or leaf. But here it is little more differentiated when compared to that of algae. So the body is more differentiated than that of algae. It is thallus-like. It is not exactly a thalloid. It is thallus-like and prostrate or erect. It may be either attached to the ground or it may be a erect structure. And it is attached to the substratum by unicellular or multicellular rhizoids. So this is important. So different types of this bryophytes, they vary based on the type of rhizoids that are present. That is, it may be either unicellular or the multicellular rhizoids. And another main difference between the algae and bryophytes is here, they need water. That is, they can exist in soil, but they need water for the reproduction. But algae purely, they need water. And they are also called the non-vascular cryptogams. Non-vascular cryptogams. Actually, this non-vascular cryptogams, it includes the algae, bryophytes and pteridophytes. And there is another term that is phanerogams, which includes gymnosperms and angiosperms, depending upon the reproductive organs. So here in these cases, the reproductive organs are hidden, so they are called cryptogams. And also one more is here non-vascular. That is, there is no xylem or phloem, no vascular tissues. So xylem is particularly for the conduction of water and phloem is for the conduction of food substances. So these bryophytes, they don't have xylem or phloem. So they are non-vascular plants. And because of the absence of xylem or phloem, the food materials and water cannot be conducted to longer distances. So these bryophytes, they cannot grow tall. They cannot grow tall because of the absence of vascular tissues. So if there is no vascular tissue, means how the conduction is taking place? It is the presence of the parenchymatous cells, but the conduction is by parenchymatous cells. So these are the main characteristic features of bryophytes. So that is great. Bryophytes are called amphibians of the plant kingdom because they can live in soil, but they need water for sexual reproduction. They occur in damp, humid, and shaded localities. So they are called Zyophytes. And body is more differentiated than that of algae. So it is thallus-like and prostrate or erect, and it is attached to the substratum by unicellular or multicellular rhizoids. And they are also, it comes under the category of non-muscular cryptogams. That is, there is no xylem or phloem, but the conduction is with the help of parenchymatous cells. Because of the absence of the conductive tissues, they cannot grow tall. So the plants that comes under bryophytes will be shorter. So actually, this is the example for the bryophyte, that is funaria. So here actually the main axis is here and it is attached to the substratum, to the either soil or the rocky places where it is attached to the substratum by means of rhizoid. They are the root-like structures. They are not real roots. They are the root-like structures. And it consists of two phases. One is the gametophytic phase and the other is the sporophytic phase. So the rhizoids, then there arises the main axis, which are connected with the leaf-like structure, and these are the gametophytic phase. And then from this, that arises the sporophytic phase. That is here it is called the foot. So different species will have the different type of this arrangement. That is the gametophyte. Some species will have the foot and the capsule, and there will be no seta. So it will be directly attached to the capsule. So generally the gametophytic phase is attached to the substratum, because this is the gametophyte, this leafy structure, and from that it arises the sporophyte. So we'll see in detail about what is the gametophytic phase and what is the sporophytic phase in detail. So actually the sporophytic plant body consists of foot, seta, and the capsule. So these bryophytes, they lack true roots, stem, or leaves. So they don't have any true roots for absorption or a proper stem-like structures of the leaves. But they may possess root-like, leaf-like, or stem-like structures. So this is one of the main feature in bryophytes. The main plant body is haploid. So what do you mean by haploid? That is, you could have studied N and the 2N condition. So N, mostly if the plant body is having the gametophytic phase, gametes, which is of haploid, then it is the gametophyte. It produces gametes, hence it is called the gametophyte. So here the main plant body is haploid and it is a gametophytic phase. And the sex organ in bryophytes are multicellular. That is, here multicellular sex organs are present, and the male sex organ is called the Anthridium. This Anthridium produces biflagellate. This is important. It has two flagella. It has biflagellate anthrazoids, and the female sex organ, that is Archegonium. Female sex organ is called Archegonium. It is flask shaped and it produces a single egg. So the male sex organ is Anthridium and the female sex organ is Archegonium. So it is flask shaped and produces a single egg. And these anthrazoids, they are released to water and they meet Archegonium. So anthrazoids actually from where they are produced. These anthrozoids are produced from Anthridium. Anthridium, it dehisces and form anthrozoids, and they are released to water. And these anthrozoids, they meet Archegonium, which is a female sex organ. An anthrozoid fuses with the egg to form an zygote. And another main difference here is this zygote. It is a 2N diploid stage, and this zygote, it do not undergo meiosis immediately, and they produce a multicellular body called a sporophyte. So there occurs a fusion between the anthrozoid and the egg to form a zygote, and this zygote do not undergo meiosis immediately, and there is a gap, and they form a multicellular body called a sporophyte. But this sporophyte is not free living. That is, it cannot live freely. So if the sporophytic phase is dominant, and this sporophyte can live freely. But here it is not free living, but is attached to the photosynthetic gametophyte. So what do you mean by this photosynthetic gametophyte? Only the gametophytic phase is able to undergo photosynthesis. They can carry out the photosynthesis and they can produce their food, but not the sporophyte. So sporophyte is not free living. It cannot live freely, but it is dependent on the photosynthetic gametophyte and derives nourishment from it. So how it gets its food? The sporophyte is getting nourishment only from gametophyte. So some cells of the sporophyte, they undergo meiosis. They undergo meiotic division to produce haploid spores. And these spores germinate to form the gametophyte. So we'll see in detail about this process, how it is happening. For example, we thought that the initially gametophyte is the plant body that is attached to the substratum by rhizoids. So initially it is the gametophyte, and it has both male and the female sex organs. It is called Anthridia and Archegonia. So gametophyte, it forms the Anthridia haploid and Archegonia. And this Anthridia, on dehiscence, it forms the anthrozoids. Anthrozoids, which is also a haploid stage. And here, the Archegonia contains a single egg cells. Archegonium is the organ and it contains the egg cell. So now what happens is this anthrozoid, it fuses with the, so this is motile and here it is static. So it fuses with the egg. The anthrozoid fuses with the egg and it forms zygote. This is the 2N stage. So, and this process requires the water. So that's what we saw, that the reproduction, it needs water. So only in the presence of water, the Anthridium dehisces and releases anthrozoids, and this anthrozoids are motile, and it reaches the Archegonium and it fuses with the egg to form the zygote, which is a diploid state. And then this zygote forms embryo by mitosis. And then this embryo, it develops into a sporophyte. Which is also a 2N stage. And it forms spore mother cell. And this spore mother cell, it produces spores. And this spores can either directly become a gametophytic plant. They grow into a new plant, that is new gametophytic plant. Or in some cases, what happens is these spores undergo germination and they form the structures that is called Protonema. And these Protonema, they'll develop into buds and they form the new plant, that is new gametophyte. So here this happens directly. The spores form the gametophyte in the case of liverworts. In the example, liverworts. But this Protonema formation, it happens in mosses. So these two are the main examples for Bryophytes. In case of liverworts, what happens is spores are directly connected to that is the spores, they develop into a gametophytic plant. But in the case of mosses, they germinate to form the structures that are called Protonema, and then it form buds which develop into gametophyte. So if you see this is the life cycle. And also you can see the alternation of generation. So what do we mean by alternation of generation? That is the gametes produce first gametes produce zygote and then they form spores and then again they form into gametes. So there are two phases. One is the gametophytic phase and another one is the sporophytic phase. So which are all gametophytic phase? For example, here you see they are all haploid cells. The Anthridia is haploid, Archegonia is haploid, and Anthrozoites is haploid. And here egg is also haploid. So all these here till here spores. These are all haploid stage. All these are haploid. So we are calling it as gametophytic generation. This is sporophytic. So on what basis we are saying that Bryophytes are gametophytic? Because here this phase is more dominant in their life cycle. For example, this Anthridia, Anthrozoites and spores are haploid. So this phase is more dominant. Gametophytic phase is more dominant when compared to the sporophytic phase. And this sporophytic phase, actually it is dependent only on the gametophyte for its survival. It is only this gametophytic phase is able to produce food by photosynthesis, and the sporophytic phase is entirely dependent on the gametophytic phase. So here the dominant phase is gametophytic, or we can say it as a haploid phase is more dominant here. Though it is a haplodiplontic cycle. In the case of Bryophytes, we can say it is a haplodiplontic cycle. Both haploid and diploid phases are present, but the more dominant is the haploid phase. So is it clear? So the gametophyte is the plant body that gets attached to the substrate by means of rhizoids. The rhizoids may be either unicellular or multicellular. And this gametophyte contains the sex organs, that is male sex organ, that is Anthridia, and the female sex organ, Archegonia, and Anthridium or dehiscence. They produce biflagellated anthrozoids, and these anthrozoids, they fuse with the egg in the Archegonium and form a zygote. And the zygote, immediately they will not produce spores, but they form an intermediate that is called the sporophytic plant body. And this sporophytic plant body, they release the spore mother cells and they release the spores. And this spores may be directly converted to or grow into a gametophytic plant, or the spores, they form the gametophytic plant indirectly through the formation of Protonium. So, and there are two types here. You can say in the case of liverworts, it is direct. And in the case of mosses, we can call it as indirect. So what is direct and indirect? That is, here one spore directly grows into a gametophytic plant body. So it is a direct development. But in the case of mosses, the spores first germinate to form a leafy structure that is called Protonema that forms buds and which develops into a gametophytic plant body. So this is the general life cycle. So by this, we can also understand about the alternation of generation. So this is one of the important diagram through which you can understand about all the species. There is a life cycle of liverworts and also of mosses. Alternation of generation. So here the gametes, actually they form zygote. Zygote is the first cell in the sporophytic phase or sporophytic generation. Zygote is the first cell. And here the spores are formed, and spores are the first cell in the gametophytic phase. That is, spores, they grow into gametophyte, and zygote, they form the spore mother cell and which releases spore. So this is the first cell here, and spores are the first cell in the gametophytic phase. So I hope you are clear with this. So zygote and spores, but this phase is dominant here. So they are dependent. The sporophytic phase is dependent on the gametophytic phase here. So we saw about the direct and also about the indirect development, how they form the gametophytic plant body. So then there are two more terms, that is, one is called the primary protonema and the secondary protonema. So what do you mean by primary and secondary? Primary protonema. So if the protonema develops directly from the spores, that is called primary protonema. And in the case of secondary protonema, is another term that is called the secondary protonema. So if it develops from any other parts other than spores, development of protonema from any other parts other than spore. Other part. This is from spores. Then we'll call it as primary protonema and secondary protonema. Yeah. So it's clear. So now I'll see about the importance of bryophytes. That is, some mosses, they provide food for herbaceous mammals and birds. So they are the food for other mammals and birds. And species of sphagnum, a moss, provide peat. So what is the role of this peat? It is those, the sphagnum is also called peat moss. So this sphagnum is used as a fuel, and it has the high water holding capacity, so that it is used as the packing material for transshipment of living material. So since it holds the water, it can be used as a packaging material for preservation. And they are ecologically important because of their role in plant succession on bare rocks or soil. Actually, this mosses, along with the lichens, and lichens also, they actually act as the first plant. That is, in the case of rocks and all, there will be no growth. So these mosses and lichens, they decompose rock and making them as a substrate for the growth of the plants. So they are ecologically more important. Since mosses form dense mat, that is, they form a layer on the soil which causes the absorption of water, and they also have the water holding capacity. So they form dense mat on the soil, and this prevents the soil erosion. So these are some of the important characteristics of, or the uses of, bryophytes. So they are economically important. Next, we'll see about the different classes that comes under bryophytes. The first one is Hepaticopsida. And this includes liverworts. And then Anthoceratopsida. And this includes hornworts. Then Bryopsida, which include mosses. So what are the main differences in what ways they are categorized into these three classes? For example, if you take the Hepaticopsida or the liverworts, the main features are, in the case of Hepaticopsida, here the sporophyte is completely dependent. Sporophyte is completely dependent on gametophyte. On gametophyte. This is one of the factors that differentiates the classes. And then the next is the sporophyte is differentiated into foot, seta, and capsule. And also they have the structures that are called true elaters. And these are used for spore dispersal. It is for the dispersal of spores. These structures called true elaters are useful. And also based on the type of rhizoids that are present. The rhizoids are unicellular and unbranched rhizoids. So the example is liverwort, which comes under Hepaticopsida. So here the sporophyte is completely dependent on gametophyte. So the gametophytic phase only synthesizes the food. So they are responsible for photosynthesis, and the sporophyte is completely dependent on gametophyte. And the sporophytic phase, it contains food, seta, and capsule. So we saw that first there will be rhizoids, then main axis, then there will be leaf-like structures here, and these are all the gametophytic phase, and above this is the sporophytic phase. So here food will be here, and the role of this food is an absorptive organ. Food is for absorption of nutrients. Absorption of nutrients from the gametophyte. So here, this is the gametophytic leaf-like structure which is responsible for carrying out the photosynthesis. So they prepare the food, and this food, it absorbs the nutrients here, and from the food it is transferred through the seta. This is the tubular structure which helps in the transport of nutrients, and here comes the capsule. So capsule is the topmost part, and this capsule or the spore, this is the sporophytic body. They have the spore mother cells, and these capsule, they produce, spore mother cells produce spores, and these spores are released. So food is responsible for the absorption of nutrients, and then comes the seta, which is responsible for the transport of nutrients to the capsule. Capsule contains the spore mother cells. They produce spores, and these spores are released, and the released spores. So here the spores will be released. This will again form the gametophyte, form a new plant. So this is actually the life cycle or the alternation of generation. So the plant is totally dependent on this gametophytic phase. But if you take Anthoceratopsida, so what is the difference? Ceratopsida. So this is onwards. So the main difference here is the sporophytic phase. It consists of food and capsule. There is no seta here. So this also differs from species to species. And sporophyte is not completely dependent on gametophyte. Not completely dependent on gametophyte. So what does this mean? So even the sporophytic part is able to produce food. That is, they can also photosynthesize, but it is dependent on the gametophyte for the absorption, for getting the nutrients. It is dependent on the gametophyte. So we can call it as a semi-parasite. It is not completely dependent on gametophyte, and they have the structures that are called the pseudo-elaters for spore dispersal. And then next, so these here also unicellular and unbranched rhizoids are present. Then comes Bryophytes or mosses. So here the main example here is Funaria, and here also the sporophyte is not completely dependent on gametophyte. That is for photosynthesis. The sporophyte can photosynthesize, but it depends on the gametophyte for some of the nutrients. And here they have the structures that is called the peristomic teeth. Here they have the structures called peristomic teeth, for that is teeth-like structures that are present on the top of the capsule, which is responsible for spore dispersal. And one more difference here is they have the multicellular rhizoids. Multicellular rhizoids. So these are the three classes that comes under Bryophytes. That is Hepaticopsida, the example Liverworts, Anthoceratopsida hornworts, and Bryopsida mosses. So based on whether the photosynthetic, that is sporophytic phase, is able to prepare its food, or whether it is completely or incomplete dependent on the gametophytic phase, that is one of the factors that determines the differentiation, and also the presence of structures in the sporophytic phase, that is food, seta, and capsule. And different types of organs are involved in spore dispersal in different classes, and also on the basis of whether the rhizoid is unicellular or multicellular. We are classifying them under different classes. Okay, is it clear? Yeah. So next we'll see so under the type of Bryophytes, we saw the liverworts and mosses. So we'll see how the reproduction takes place in these two, that is liverworts and mosses. So if you take the liverworts, they grow usually in moist, shady habitat such as banks of streams, marshy ground, damp soil, bark of trees, and deep in the woods. So they grow only in moist habitat, and that plant body is thalloid. So there is no clear differentiation into root, stem, or leaves. And example is Markensia. So Markensia is an example for a liverwort. Then thallus is dorsiventral and closely oppressed, that is, it is closely attached to the substrate. The leafy members have tiny leaf-like appendages in two rows on the stem-like structures. So when you compare to the mosses, the liverworts are little more thalloid. There is no much clear differentiation. So if you see the mosses, Funaria, there will be somewhat clear differentiation into root-like and leaf-like structures. But in the case of liverworts, it is the plant body is more thalloid. No proper differentiation. So if you see, for example, this is the thalloid structure. So there is no clear differentiation. So these are the rhizoids that are present. And if you see the reproduction, so how the reproduction is taking place? By fragmentation of thalli. So the thallus, it undergoes fragmentation, that is, it breaks down and form the, that is, it breaks into pieces, and each new piece, it grows into a new thallus. So by fragmentation of the thalli, or by the formation of these structures that are called the gemmae. So gemmae are nothing, but they are the green multicellular asexual buds that develop in the small receptacles. The receptacles is called gemma cups. So in the thallus, so this is the thallus. In the thallus, there are small receptacles that are called gemma cups, and these gemma cups, they produce gemmae, small buds that are called the gemmae. And these gemmae are detached. So this part alone, this gemmae, they detach from the parent body and they germinate to new individuals. So this is one mode of asexual reproduction in the case of liverworts. So this is more important in liverworts. So it happens by fragmentation of the thalli or by the formation of gemmae. So what is gemmae? Gemmae are produced in gemma cups, and these gemmae detach to form a new individual. And the male and the female sex organs are produced on the same or different thalli. So it may be either on the same thalli or the different thalli. So this sporophyte is differentiated into foot, seta, and capsule. That we saw, foot is responsible for absorbing the nutrients from the gametophyte, and seta is the transporting, that is, it transport the nutrients from the food to the capsule. And after meiosis, spores are produced within the capsule. So within the capsule are the spore mother cells which produce the spores, and these spores germinate to form a free living gametophyte. So I hope it is clear. So this is the structure of the gemma cup, and this Archegonium is the female sex organ, and this Anthridium, that is this, the holding, the filament which holds the male sex organ, that is Anthridium, is Anthridium, and which holds the female sex organ, Archegonium, is called Archegonium. So this is the female thallus and this is the male thallus. So this is the thallus, not properly differentiated into root, stem, and leaf. So the different species will have the different type of plant body here. So here, this is the anthridial head, and this anthridial head, it releases the sperm, and this is the female gametophyte, gemma cup and female gametophyte. So this sperm, it fuses with the, inside the archegonium is the egg, and the sperm, it fuses and it forms an embryo. Then mature sporophyte, it releases the spores. Then the spore, again, it forms a gametophytic plant body. So this is the life cycle of liverwort. Then if you take mosses, so what is the main difference here from the liverworts? Here the predominant stage of a life cycle of the moss is the gametophyte. So gametophyte is the predominant site. And here we saw that in the case of liverworts, it is direct development. That is, the spore will directly develop into a gametophytic plant body. But here in the case of mosses, there are two stages. First stage is the protonema stage, and second stage is the leafy stage. So what are these stages? The case of protonema stage, it develops directly from a spore. So from the spore, it forms the protonema. It is a creeping green branch, or frequently filamentous. So it is a filamentous stage. And then next comes the leafy stage. So it develops from the secondary protonema as a lateral bud. So next is the leafy stage, and it consists of upright slender axis bearing spirally arranged leaves. So first is the protonema, that is a filament, forms as a filament, and then it progresses to the leafy stage, and they are attached to the soil through multicellular and branched rhizoids. So this is one of the main difference here. So branched rhizoids are present, and at this stage they bear the sex organ. Actually, so initially, both, if you see the liverworts and mosses, the process is actually the same. Only thing is here the spore will directly grow into a gametophytic plant. There occurs an intermediate stage. There is a formation of Protonema. Then reproduction happens by vegetative reproduction by fragmentation and budding in the secondary Protonema, and also by sexual reproduction. So how the sexual reproduction is happening? The Anthridia and Archegonia are produced at the apex of leafy shoots. So in the tip of the shoot, there will be Anthridia and Archegonia, both the male and the female reproductive organ, and after fertilization, the zygote develops to a sporophyte. So this is the same process that we saw. So zygote will form a sporophyte having a fruit, seta, and a capsule. Then sporophyte in mosses is more elaborate than that of liverworts. So in the case of liverworts, there is no proper differentiation into root, stem, or leaf. So there it is a thalloid body. It's a thalloid. But in the case of sporophyte in masses, it is little more advanced. There will be more leaf-like structures. That is, we saw in Funaria and all. The gametophytic phase will have more leaf-like structures, and they can photosynthesize. And even the sporophytic phase, they can also photosynthesize, but it is not completely independent. It is dependent on the gametophytic phase for the absorption of nutrients. So it is dependent on gametophyte. And the capsule contains spores, because in the capsules are the spore mother cells. And these spore mother cells, they produce spores, haploid spores. And mosses have an elaborate mechanism for spore dispersal. That's particularly, it has these structures that is called teeth-like structure that is called peristome. Teeth, which is responsible for spopula, and also that capsule, the upper part is the capsule, and it is covered by the structure that is called operculum. And they have the teeth-like structures called peristome, which is responsible for spore dispersal. So if you see generally in Bryophytes, so what is the gametophytic body will have the rhizoids. The rhizoids may be either unicellular or multicellular. And in the case of liverworts, it is unicellular. And in the case of mosses, it is multicellular. And the rhizoids helps to attach to the substratum. And then what happens? Through the main axis, there will be formation of the leaves, and then there occurs the sporophytic phase. So in the sporophytic phase, there occurs the formation of spores in the help of spore mother cells. So where it is happening? In the capsule of the sporophytic phase. And after the spores are formed, these spores again they grow into one gametophytic plant body. So this is called the alternation of generation. That is, there occurs an alternating gametophytic and the sporophytic phase, but the gametophytic phase is more dominant here. So I hope it is clear. You able to follow, right? So if you see mosses, the examples are Funaria, Sphagnum, and Polytrichum. So what is the role of this? We saw the Sphagnum as peat moss, and also it is called bog moss because it likes to grow on acidic bog. And Polytrichum, it is called hair cap moss. And Funaria is called green moss or rope moss. So the sphagnum is more important commercially because of its water retaining capacity. And Funaria is little evolved, and it is resembles the, because it has the true leaf-like character. It's not actually true leaves. It is highly evolved when compared to that of the liverworts. So is it clear then? And any doubts till now? So under Bryophytes, so what are the things that we saw now? First, how they differ from algae. So what is the main difference is slowly from aquatic, they are evolving to a land plant. So in what ways they are evolving? So here also they are non-vascular. They don't have the conducting tissue, xylem and phloem. So actually they cannot grow tall. But though there is no water, they can grow in soil, but they need water for fertilization. Because we saw now in the case of sexual reproduction, particularly it is of oogamous type. What do you mean by oogamous? That is the female sex organ will be static, it cannot move. So here the egg is present inside the Archegonium, and the male gamete is the anthrozoid, biflagellated anthrozoid. It's coming and fusing with the egg cell. So it is sexual reproduction is of oogamous type. And here they need water for reproduction, and the term is called zygogamy. That is, if the male gamete swims in water to reach the female gamete and fertilizes it, that process is called zoidogamy. That is, it swims in water. So there is a gradual transition from aquatic to the land forms. And also in the case of algae, the plant body is thalloid. And here, though there is no formation of true root, stem and leaves, there are false root, stem and leaves. That is root-like, stem-like and leaf-like structures. They are called, the root-like structures are called the rhizoids here, and they also have the leaf-like structures. And then regarding the reproduction, we saw about the sexual reproduction, how it is happening, and in the case of liverworts, about the direct development, that is after the formation of the spore, it forms a gametophytic plant. But in the case of mosses, there occurs an indirect development through the protonema, and then that protonema develops into buds, and which develop into a new gametophytic plant. So there occurs an alternation of generation between the gametophytic phase and the sporophytic phase. And in general, the sporophytic phase is dependent on the gametophytic phase for its survival. So the plant body is a gametophyte in the case of Bryophytes, and they undergo a haplodiplontic. That's what we saw, right? The haplodiplontic life cycle. Both the life cycle has both the haploid and the diploid phase, but haploid base is more dominant here. So these are the main features about the Bryophytes. So I hope it is clear. So we'll see a few questions related to Bryophytes. Bryophytes mostly grow in dry area, in snow, in moist shaded areas, in hills, damp plus humid plus shaded localities. So what will be the correct answer for this? So any doubts? Were you clear with the topic, Bryophytes? So Bryophytes is not growing in dry area, not in snow, but it requires a moist, it's not purely aquatic, also not in water. So in moist shaded areas and hills, damp, humid and shaded localities. So C is the correct option. Plant body of Bryophytes is, so how the plant body of Bryophytes is? It's less differentiated than that of algae, equally differentiated to that of algae, more differentiated to that of algae. It is not differentiated at all. So what will be the answer here? When you compare to algae, how the plant body of bryophytes will be? Yeah, it is option C. Yes, correct. Ivan and Karunya. Good. So the plant body is more differentiated. Not less. It is not equally also. It is not differentiated. So the third question is the plant body of all bryophytes or gametophyte, haploid and thallus like, having root, stem plus leaf. No root, no stem and no leaf. Xylem and phloem and wood. So regarding the plant body of bryophytes, how it will be? Yes, B. Good. So I think you are able to follow, right? B, because the bryophytes don't have no proper root, no proper stem or no proper leaf. Only false root, stem and leaf or leaf, root, stem like structures they have. So the option B is correct. That is the plant body of all bryophytes or gametophyte, haploid and thallus like, having no root, no stem and no leaf. So we'll go to the next question. Which is the predominant phase in the life cycle of bryophytes? Whether it is a gametophyte, sporophyte, seta or sporogonium. So what is the correct answer for this? Yeah, A. Good. Karunya. So we saw in detail about the life cycle of bryophytes. So here, most of it, the gametophytic phase is more dominant here than the sporophytic phase. And seta, so what is seta? Seta is the structure that is present in the sporophytic phase. So the sporophytic phase is attached to the gametophytic plant body through the foot, then seta, then capsule. So seta, it helps in the transport of nutrients from food to capsule. So that is not the prominent phase and it is not sporogonium also. So the correct option is option A, that is gametophyte is the predominant phase in the life cycle of bryophytes. So you go to the next question. Bryophytes are not characterized by, so you be clear while reading, then only you can answer correctly. Bryophytes are not characterized by well-developed root system and vascular tissues, rhizoids, alternation of generation, and presence of chlorophyll. So what is the correct answer for this? Yeah, good. Karunya, A. That is, the bryophytes are characterized by rhizoids. They have the rhizoids, that is, they have either unicellular or multicellular rhizoids, and they show alternation of generation, that is both the haploid and diploid phase, and they show chlorophyll. So because of chlorophyll, they are able to photosynthesize and produce their own food, but they do not have well-developed root system and vascular tissue. So vascular tissues are not present here in bryophytes. So this is the correct answer, that is option A. As a result of the absence of vascular tissues, they are not able to grow tall because there is no proper conduction, but the conduction is carried out by parenchymatous cells. So the next question is, which one is not a true mass? Not a true mass. So we saw, so we, while studying these liverworts and then the mosses category, be clear in studying the examples. Markensia, which comes under liverworts, and this funaria. So what is the option for this? Nest mass, and then funaria, sphagnum, and polytrichum. Yeah, it is nest moss. I'm good, correct. Because all these examples we saw under mosses. Funaria, sphagnum and polytrichum. So by seeing the name, what will happen usually will be confused by this, though this must be a true moss. So but the actual option is A. That is, nest moss is not a true moss. And similarly, there is another one, club moss. Sometimes they will. So club moss is actually not a moss. And this is actually, they have the vascular tissues. It comes under the vascular plant. So by seeing that term mass, you should not be confused. So you could study the example clearly so that you will know which one will come under which category, liverworts or the masses. And next is the Protonema. Protonema is a stage of gametophytic generation. And it is a creeping green branched stages and it develops directly from a spore. Produces lateral bud which forms leafy plant body. All. So which is the correct option for this? Yeah, good, Karnia. It is option D. So Protonema, all the features are the Protonema's features. That is, Protonema is a stage of gametophytic generation and it is a creeping green branched stage and it develops directly from a spore. So from the spore, first we saw that in the case of liverworts, the spore will directly form the gametophytic plant body, gametophyte. But in the case of mosses, what will happen? It forms the Protonema, the intermediate stage Protonema. Then it may develop into a bud and this grow into gametophyte. So it produces lateral bud which forms leafy plant body. So all are correct. In Bryophytes, meiosis occurs in. So where the meiosis is happening? In the spores, gamete mother cells, gametes, spore mother cells, in capsule or sporophyte or in sporangium. So which option will be correct here? Yeah, good. It's option D. So how it is option D? So actually in the case of Bryophytes, we can say that meiosis itself as sporic meiosis. So what do you mean by the sporic meiosis? That is, normally in some algae and all, what will happen is the zygote directly will form spores. It is an immediately the zygote will form the spores. But here in the case of Bryophytes, what is happening? The zygote is forming embryo, then it forms the sporophytic plant body, and in the sporophytic plant body, actually capsule contains the spore mother cell, and this spore mother cells, they produce spores. So that is called the sporic meiosis, which is one of the main feature here. So meiosis occurs in spore mother cells in capsule or sporophyte or sporogonium. I hope it is clear. Then next, place the following groups of plants in order, beginning with those that first appeared on the earth and progressing towards those that appeared most recently in time. This gymnosperms, angiosperms, ferns, moss, algae, or which order it will be? Algae, moss, ferns, gymnosperms and angiosperms, moss, algae, ferns, angiosperms, then gymnosperms, algae, ferns, angiosperms, gymnosperms and moss. So what will be the correct option for this? Yeah, good. It is option B. because the first is algae, aquatic, then slowly evolving into land plants, then ferns, which comes under the group Pteridophytes, then seed-forming plants, then comes the flowering plants. So B is the correct option. Next question. The embryonic development in Bryophyte takes place in. So where the embryonic development takes place, whether it is happening in Protonema, Sporangium, Anthridium, and Archegonium. So which is the correct option? So you know all these terms. Protonema, spore. First it forms the Protonema in the case of mosses. Option B. In the case of Bryophytes, actually how the fusion takes place. Here in the embryo forming, how the embryo is formed. It is, we saw that the Anthridium, it releases anthrozoid, and this anthrozoid is the motile. So it reaches the Archegonium, and this Archegonium contains the egg. So the fusion actually is happening in the Archegonium, and after fusion, the zygote is formed, and then there occurs a formation of embryo. So where it is happening? The formation of embryo is happening in the Archegonium. So which will be the correct option here? The option D will be the correct option here. So you're able to follow? Yeah. Hope it is clear, Karunya and Diamond. Yeah. So you read the question properly. That is the embryonic development in Bryophyte. It takes place only in the Archegonium. So this is the ovogamete. We saw, right? Because this is static. Inside the Archegonium, this is happening, and the anthrozoid is mobile. So it is entering the Archegonium. So, is it clear? Yeah. So with this, we have completed the Bryophytes. So any doubts?